Hello everyone, welcome back to Programming Fields. I'm Umesh Rana and today we have an exciting tutorial lined up. We will be diving into the world of web development with Laravel and Ajax. Specifically, we will be building a full CRUD system using Ajax for seamless user experience. To start off, let's quickly recap what CRUD operations are. So CRUD stands for create, read, update and delete, which are the fundamental operations in any database-driven application. Today, we will focus on implementing these operations in Laravel with an extra twist, Ajax. Ajax allows us to perform these operations asynchronously and it provides a smoother and more dynamic user experience. But before moving to the example, let's understand the importance of Ajax in Laravel CRUD. Why Ajax, you ask? Well, by incorporating Ajax into our Laravel CRUD operations, we can update parts of a web page without having to reload the entire page. This leads to faster response times and a more interactive user interface, and it is a powerful combination that can elevate your web development skills. So the goals for today's tutorial is I am to guide you through setting up a Laravel project, implementing each CRUD operations, handling Ajax request, and incorporating best practices for a robust application. So by the end of this tutorial, you will be equipped with the knowledge to seamlessly integrate Laravel and Ajax for efficient CRUD operations. So if you are ready, let's get started. So I have navigated to the system and open the terminal, and inside this specified directory, I will create a new Laravel application. So I will hit enter, composer, create project, prefer dist, Laravel, and here I will create Ajax CRUD. So this will be our application name. I will hit enter, it will start creating this Laravel application. Yeah, so the application is created. Now simply I will open it in VS Code editor. So I will have to navigate to the application folder as cd Ajax CRUD and I will open it in VS Code editor. Okay, so at the very first step, we will have to set up our database connection. So simply I will navigate to .env file and here I will give a database name as Laravel Ajax CRUD and this is my DB password. Okay, so now I will have to navigate to the database and here I will create a new database. So I will give a database name as Laravel Ajax CRUD. Okay, so the database is created. Now simply open it, and as of now we don't have any tables. Okay, now in the next step we will create a modal and migration. So simply navigate to the terminal and here we will add PHP artisan make modal todo and -m. So this will create a modal and migration for todo. Okay, so hit enter and yes, we have a modal and migration. So firstly we will create a database schema. So inside this todo migration we will add a few columns just like string, and here we will add title as we want to do title, and by default it will be nullable, and the next column we will have description. Okay, and this will be text, and also we will add is completed flag. Now after creating this migration, let's switch back to modal. So inside this app we have this todo modal, and here we will specify the fillable property. So we will write protected fillable, and inside this array we will have to define those columns as title, description and each completed flag. And inside this migration, and instead of this text for this is completed flag, I want this to be boolean. Yes, so we will have by default there will be default property, so we will write default as false. Okay, this is fine. Now let's migrate this schema. So switch back to terminal again and hit enter PHP artisan migrate. Yes, so the schemas are ready. If we will check out to the database and let's refresh it, so we have the table created. In the next step, we will create a view in which we will have a to-do create form. So let's switch back to resources folder, and inside this views, I will create firstly a master layout. Okay, so here I will add layouts folder, and inside this layouts, I will create a file that is app.blade.php. This will be our master layout. So here I will include Bootstrap 5 CDN. So for that I have already one extension BS5. So I will simply write BS5, and if I will hit enter, yes, it included Bootstrap 5 skeleton. So let's give one title as to do Ajax CRUD in Laravel 10, and here I will just remove these all things, and here I will use this yield directive in order to extend this master layout in different views. Okay, so I will write yield content, and now inside this views folder I will create another folder as to-dos, and inside this to-dos folder I will create a view as index.blade.php. Okay, and inside this index blade I will extend that master layout. So I will write extends layouts.app, and next we will have to write section content because we have used yield directive, and in between this section I will write our HTML snippet to create view. So here I will create one container, and inside this container I will create one row, and inside this row I will create one column as 12 and one button that will be hyperlink basically. So we will add create to do button, and I will provide class as btn primary. This is fine, and just above this row I will pass one title as h3 class text center, and I will provide Ajax CRUD in Laravel 10, and here I will just pass JavaScript void. So on click on this button I want to open one Bootstrap model in which we will have a to-do form. So from there we will create our to-do. So in order to do that I will simply check out to the Bootstrap documentation. So I will write Bootstrap 5 model. So I want this static backdrop. So simply I will copy this layout. Okay, and let's come to the VS Code, and instead of adding this model directly to this view I will create one subview inside this to-dos folder. So I will create another folder as subview, and inside this I will create one file as create.blade.php. Paste it here. Okay, now let's change this id to to-do model. Now let's come to this index blade, and here we will include to-dos.subview.create. Okay, so now we want to open that to-do model by clicking on this button. So here I will give one id as create to do btn, and we required click event functionality. So I will create one separate script file. Inside this public I will create one folder as assets, and inside this assets I will create one JS folder, and inside this JS folder I will create one file as a script.js, and I will be using jQuery. So in order to use this jQuery we will have to import jQuery CDN first inside this master blade. So again I will have to check out to the jQuery documentation, and I will write jQuery CDN, and I will use this minified JS. So I will copy this CDN and I will switch back to application, and just above this Bootstrap libraries I will add this jQuery CDN. Yeah, this is fine. So now we have this jQuery ready. Now we can use jQuery snippet as document.ready function, and here we will have to create one click event just to open that model by clicking on this create to do button. I will copy this id and switch back to here, and I will write this create to do btn dot click function. Okay, when I will click on this create to do button I want to toggle that model. So here we have this to do model, we have given the id as to do model. Let's copy this id and use this selector as to do model dot. So here after this selector we will use model function, and inside this model we will have to pass toggle. Now we will have to render this index blade file. So for that we will create one controller first. Let's switch back to terminal, and here we will create one resource controller. We will write php artisan make controller, and our controller name will be to do controller, and I will pass one flag as resource. Okay, so the controller is created. Now let's switch back to this controller, and here inside this index function I want to render that view. So I will write return view as todos.index, and here we can use this return type as view. We will have to import this view as use illuminate view class. This is Laravel 10 functionality. We can define the return type inside this function. So now respective to this controller functions we have to define route. So let's switch back to routes folder. Inside this we have this web.php. Here I will use resource route. So I will pass this resource function, and inside this I will use this endpoint as to-dos. We have to call that to-do controller. So we will call that to-do controller as to-do controller : class. That's it. Here we don't have to define any function name because we have created this controller as a resource controller. By default, this resource method will determine which functions has to call. Now let's run this application. So open this terminal and enter php artisan serve. Yeah, so the application is started. Now let's switch back to browser and let's access this route, localhost 8000, and here I will specify this to-dos endpoint. Yes, so we have this view ready. Now let's shift this button to this right. So switch back to code, and inside this index I will write text and class, and I will provide some space from top and bottom. That's it. Let's refresh it. Yeah, so our application is running here. Now let's switch back to code. So we have created this script.js inside this asset.js folder. So we will have to navigate to this app.blade. After these scripts, we will include our custom script as a script type equals text/javascript, and we will have to pass src, and the path will be assets js/script.js. We will have this script close. Now let's check if a script is rendering. So here, after this document ready function, I will pass one alert as hey. If I will refresh it, yes, a script is rendered now. So let me just remove this, refresh it, and if I will try to click on this button, our model is opened now. Now let's design a basic form here, just in order to save to-do list. So switch back to this view. So here we have this create blade, and inside this model body, I will create form layout as div class form group. Okay, so I will write label as to do title, and we will have one input type as text, name as title, id as title, and we will pass placeholder as well, title, and at last we will have class as form control. All right, let's close this. Let me toggle this sidebar, and we will give some space from top and bottom as padding of 2, and I will just copy and paste this layout for description as well. So this is description, and instead of this input type text, I will change this to text area. This is fine, and this will be description. Yes, and instead of this self closing, we will have this separate closing, and I want this button as button type submit, and this button text will be save. So after this model content, I will use this form, and we will have to pass action. So we will define action as route to-dos.store. okay, and method will be post, and after this model footer, this form will have this closing tag. Let's align it. Yes, and we will have to define this title as create to do. Also we will change this id as model title. Okay, now let's switch back to browser, refresh it, and let's try to click on this button. Yes, so we have a basic form ready as to do title and description. Now we have to create this form submit event. Okay, currently this form is submitting directly with the form request, so we have to handle this form submit event using jQuery and Ajax, so that our form will not refresh and it will be submitted asynchronously. So for that, let's create one submit functionality for this form. So let's switch back to code, and here we will give id to this form as to do form. So we have given this id as to do form. Now we will have to handle this submit event. So we will have to create the submit handler for this form, but in the form we have defined this to do title and description, and we want to validate this form before submission. So initially we will have one client side validation. All right, so for that we will be using jQuery validator. jQuery provides validator library, so we can simply include that CDN as well. So let's search for jQuery validator CDN. Okay, so inside this jQuery validate, we can copy this minified.js. So let's click on this copy and come to this app blade, and after this jQuery we have to add this validate CDN. So now we will be able to validate our form using jQuery library. Now let's define the validation rule inside this script. So we will have to copy that form ID. So we have this to do dash form, and inside this script tag we will define as to do form dot validate function. Okay, and inside this validate function object we will have to define rules, and this will be object because we will have more than one input field. So based on the input field ID or name attribute, we can define those key. So initially we have this title, just like title. So we will write title as required. Okay, and similarly we have the description. So I want description as required. So this validate library provides different function and rules. So for more information, we can check out this documentation of jQuery validate plugin. So search for jQuery validate, and here let's switch to this documentation. So inside this documentation, if you will scroll down, then we have this validate function. So let's open this in a new tab. And in order to validate this form, we have to pass this selector ID of the form and this validate function. Okay, and also this provides submit handler. That means once this form is validated, it will be submitted automatically using this submit handler. And here it provides different type of function in order to validate or write validation rules. So we can see this is required, remote, min length, max length, mean value, max value, step, email, URL, and many more. So let's open any of the rule here. If we'll scroll down, then we can check the usage of this required field rules. Okay, so inside these rules, we have to define this field key. Field means input ID or name attribute, whatever you have. We can define nested object, like if you have more than one validation rule, then we can define just like this. So this will create a separate validation just for one input as required, mean, max, URL, email, etc. So let's switch back to this code, and here for this title we want multiple rules just like required. All right, so we will define required as true, and also we will define min length. So I will write this min length as 3, and also I will write this max length. So I want max length as 50 characters. Same thing for description. So I will write this description as separate object, and I will write required as true, min length as 10 characters, and max length will be 255. That's it. Yeah, this is done. Now we can check out to the application. So if I will refresh this form, and again if I will open this model, now let's try to submit. Yes, so on submit on this form, it triggered the required field validation. All right, and if we will inspect this one, then we will able to see it generated label in order to display the validation error message. All right, so we can change this label color to red. So we will define one CSS in app blade itself. So as of now, I'm going to just create one internal CSS, and just for this error, I want this color as has FF0055. Now let's refresh it, and let's try to submit this form again. Yes, so this looks nice now. Now let's check the min and max validation rule. So you can see this triggered min, and here this min. Also we can customize this validation error messages here. So for that, this validate plugin provides custom attribute as message. So if we will check out to this documentation, and if we will scroll down here, yes, so we can display the custom error messages by defining this message object. So inside this messages object, we have to define the key and that validation error message. So let's switch back to code, and let's add this one. So after this rules, we have to add messages object just like this, and here for a separate object just like for title, we have to define this required message as please enter to do title. Same thing for min and max. So we will have to define this min length to do title must be at least 3 chars. Same thing for max length, we will have to specify must not be greater than 50 chars. Now let's copy and paste it for description. So change this to description, and here description, change this to 10 and to 5. Now let's come to the browser, refresh this application, and let's try to submit now. So yes, we can see Now the error is customized. So we can set different type of validation rules as per our requirement. This supports different type of data as required, min, max. Also, we can specify a regular expression in order to validate form more specifically. So that we will see in a separate video, like we will implement those things in advanced way. Now let's switch back to form, and now we have to handle this form submission event. Alright, so for that we will be using this submit handler. We can implement this submit handler. Now let's come to this code. And after this validation rules, here we will write submit handler function, and inside this function we have to pass form as an argument, and we will be using this form object serialize. Okay, so let's define one variable as form data, and we will write dollar form dot serialize function. Okay, so we will be using serialize array function. So this serialize array function will be extracting all the form input values from this form, and after that we will be using $.ajax, and we will specify the Ajax way to submit this form data. Let's define URL. So initially we will submit the form on the specified URL, and we have defined this route as resource route. So we will be specifying to-dos only. So this will be submitted, this form, on to-dos.store route. And next we have to define type. So we will be specifying method type as post. Also we will have to define data. So we will be passing this form data that we have serialized using this serialized array function. So we can write simply form data, and if we want to display any loader before this submit function, then we can use this before send function. That I will come to this later. And after that we will have success function, means on submit what I will receive from this. So I will have to capture that here, and I will write the success response. I will display console.log as response. At last we have to define error message. In case if the form submission is failed, then we have to capture that error message. So we can write error, that is done. So before submit we can display any loading text, or we can specify any loader here. So as of now I will just write console.log loading. Later I will display this in the form with the loader. This is done. And in order to submit this form we have to pass CSRF token. As we know, Laravel requires CSRF token on every form submit. So we are using Ajax way here. So in Ajax we can pass CSRF token using headers, and at this top we have to define a $.ajax setup function. Inside this Ajax setup we will have to pass headers object, and inside this headers we will have to pass x CSRF dash token, and this value will capture CSRF token. So we can pass CSRF token in two different ways. The first way is meta attribute. That means we have to define one meta field here. So for that we will have to write meta name equals CSRF dash token and content, and inside this content we will be using CSRF helper function, just like this. Okay, so from here we can fetch this CSRF token inside this header. So in order to capture that meta we have to write $meta and name equals CSRF token, as we defined name as CSRF, and we have to capture this content. All right, so we will write dot attribute, that means attr, and we will use this content. All right, that means whatever CSRF token is generated using this CSRF token helper function, that will be captured here. So this is the first way to pass this CSRF token. Now let's come to the browser, refresh this form, open it, fill some random value, and let's try to submit. Yes, now we can see we have this XML HTTP request, that is Ajax request, passed inside this form. Okay, and from here in this payload this title and description is passed. Now let's come to the controller first. So inside this to do controller we have this store function. So by default this form is submitting to this store function. So here we will write dump and die request all. Okay, now let's replace this XML HTTP request, and now we can see we have submitted this title and description. That means this form is submitted now. And if we will check to this headers and if we will scroll down here, then we can see inside this cookie it passed this CSRF token. Also we can able to see that CSRF token inside this head just like this. So this is the first way to pass CSRF token through Ajax request. So now in the second way we have to comment this Ajax setup, and what we will do, we can pass that CSRF token directly from this form itself. So inside this form we will be using CSRF directive as we usually do in the form submission. So here we have handled this form submission and we have serialized this form data. That means when this form will serialized, this will capture these input fields along with this CSRF token. As we know, this CSRF directive generates one input type hidden with the CSRF token. Okay, so now let's try to submit this form. Again, if I will submit, and you can see this form has been submitted. So using these two ways we can handle this CSRF thing. So preferably if you are using Ajax, then you can use this approach, or for the simplicity you can handle this CSRF. It totally depends on your submit handler. If you are using this serialize function, then this CSRF token will be captured from this form automatically, or else you will have to define that CSRF token inside this meta attribute. Now let's work upon this form submit handler. So here we can add server-side validation as well based on your requirement. So we can write $this validate request array, and we will write title as required, description as required. That is fine for now. I'm not going to write in-depth validation because that we already saw in the previous video. So now let's submit this form and we will make entry inside this database. So we have created this to-do model. Alright, so I will be using this to-do model create function, and inside this to-do create function I will specify attribute as title, and this will come from request title. Similarly, we will have description, so I will write description. This is fine. And we will have to import this to-do model, so I will write use app modals to do. That's it. And I will capture this response in this variable as to do, and then I will have to return this response in the form of JSON. So I will write if to do has been created, then I will simply return this response in JSON, and inside this JSON I will create one array, and I will write status as success, message as success, to do is created, else I will return back with error. So I will write status failed, message failed, unable to create to do. Yeah, this is done. Now we have to capture this status and message inside this success handler, inside this success function. So we already displayed this console response. Now let's come to the browser and let's check this one. So I will open this console first. Let's try to create one to do Laravel 10 Ajax CRUD. Okay, let's try to submit this form. Yes, this form is submitted, and here we got this response, success to do is created, and before send we added that console log as loading, so that is already displaying here. So after this form submission we have to display this success response, and we have to reset this form. Alright, so that this form input will be cleared and this model will be closed automatically. So let's do that. So inside this response we are getting a status and message. So we will check if a status is success. Alright, so if response dot status is success, then I will append one alert inside this index blade, because when this model will be closed we will have this index page only, because in this background we have this index page only, right? So we will be displaying at alert success or anything here inside this index blade. So I will just come to this code, and inside this index blade we had created this column of 12. So instead of 12 I will change this to 6 first, and just above this one I will create another column as 6. Okay, and I will give one contain ID, just like div ID response. So this will be empty div, and inside this empty div I will append that alert message from here. Okay, so I will write dollar as response.html, and inside this I will create one alert component as div class alert success, and this will be alert dismissible. Okay, this div will be closed just like this. So instead of double quotes, better we can write a backtick so that we can able to append message directly here, and we will have to write button type will be button and class will be btn close just like this, and here we will have to display message from this response. So we will type response dot message. Okay, and we will have to write data dismiss property to alert. This is fine. And similarly for this field we will write else if response status is failed, response dot status equals field, we can use triple equals. Okay, and I will simply paste it here. So this will be alert danger, response dot message is fine. If we have any error, then we can simply display this same alert response, and on every form submission this div response should be cleared automatically. So here on submit handler, before sending this Ajax request, I will just make it empty. So I will write response dot empty function. Now let's come to the browser, refresh this page, and also we have to Google this model. Right, when we got this response, we have to Google this model and we have to clear this input field. So we will have to write this reset property using this form selector. Okay, we will be writing this as to do form the first 0 index dot reset function. Okay, after resetting this form, we will have to toggle this model. So our model name is this one. We have to copy this one and let's add here. So when we will get any response, our form will be resetted and this model will be closed automatically, and the response will be displayed inside this index blade div response. Now let's come to the browser, refresh this application. Now let's try to submit this form. So I will write Laravel Ajax application, Laravel Ajax application description. Now let's try to submit this form. Yes, Todo is created and we got this success response. Right, now if we'll check out to the database, and now let's refresh, and yes, Todo is created and this is not closing. Okay, so I guess I have misplaced this class data. Yeah, so we have to write data bs dismiss because we are using Bootstrap 5. Okay, this is done. Now let's refresh and let's try to create another to-do list, description of to-do list. It. Yes, now we are able to close it. Okay, so that's it for this video. In the next video we will see how we will be able to fetch those created to-do list and we will be displaying here in this index plate. Alright, so stay tuned for the next video. Thank you and see you in the next video.